Okay, shall we kick off? Um, Kaylee, Josh, you there?
Good
Hello,
morning.
hello. All right, how we doing?
Very well, thank you.
Good, thank
Good,
you, Mitchell.
good. So, pre-warning, I've tried my best to keep my dogs quiet, but one of them's going absolutely wild in the background. If you can hear dogs barking, I'm sorry, the treats didn't work. Um, so yeah. But anyway, thank you everyone for joining. Just before we kick off, just as in terms of some housekeeping, we are recording the call today. So if you're submitting questions, just make sure you don't share anything too sensitive. If you'd like to ask them directly after, please feel free to send us a direct message. You can ask questions via the chat or the Q&A function. Um, Thanks for joining. You've joined Trust Keith's monthly data protection office hours, and this is where we try to distill data protection down into simple, easy, and interesting conversations. I am your host, Mitch. I am a director of revenue at Trust Keith, and I am joined by two fabulous guests today. Kaylee, over to you for a quick intro.
Hello, I feel like I'm on a game show. Hi, I'm Kaylee Logan Cleghorn. I'm the lead DPO here at Trust Keith. I've been working with data protection since 2018, so right in line with GDPR coming in and when everyone's interest in the field exploded. I have previously worked in the charity sector and was the head of operations and data protection for a large international NGO. So I come at things from an operational perspective as well and have seen numerous cyber insurance questionnaires in my time.
Thanks, Kaylee. I'm trying to wonder if I was a game show host, like which game show I'd host. I'm not sure. Maybe the Traitors. That's my favorite at the moment. Josh, over to you.
Yeah, so Josh, insurance product manager at Capsule, spanning insurance for about 10 years. I've done a bit of broking, bit of underwriting, dealt with helicopter fleets, insured elephants in Wales, done a whole bunch of weird and wonderful, wacky stuff in insurance that, for me it's exciting. Maybe not the most exciting topic for everyone else, insurance, but yeah, now I'm an insurance product manager and I make policies all nice and shiny and try and bring insurance closer to companies rather than companies closer to insurance. Just make the whole process a bit more easier for people to manage.
Nice. Thanks, Josh. I think insurance is interesting. We're blending two of the most interesting topics ever here, insurance and privacy. So it's going to be a thrilling one, ladies and gents. I hope you're excited. Plan for today's call, and I guess a bit of context. Both Trust Keith and Capsule Insurance focus on helping companies in the scale-up space, both small, mid, and large scale-ups. Trust Keith in particular, we focus on helping companies become and stay data protection compliant. We do that by providing a combination of a dedicated expert who is embedded into our customers' businesses, backed up by a platform that effectively acts as like the operating system that we use to deliver a privacy program. And both Trust Keith and Capsule obviously cover the insurance broking side of things for scale ups. Speak to lots and lots and lots of scale up companies, and one of the things that are coming up in an increasingly common are coming up increasingly commonly in conversations are things like data breaches, which are reaching the headlines. And so, off the back of our conversations with customers, we felt it would make sense to focus on what are some of the most common privacy-related insurance claims. And spoiler, some of them are going to really connect into the headlines you've seen recently. So, for today's call, we're going to look at three of the most common scenarios. And for each of those scenarios, we're going to break down what are the red flags to look out for, what are the insurance considerations, and what are some practical prevention steps that you can take today to prevent these claim scenarios from happening in your business. And before I jump into that, I usually come on to questions at the end, but I just wanted to flag this question we got from one of our audience members, which for me will underpin a lot of the conversations that we're going to be having today. So just bear this question in mind as we go through. And just so everyone can hear it, the question is, how do you get people to realize that data privacy and security is super important when they are super busy and have very little time? And this will come to the crux of a lot of the issues that we start to talk about. So, without further ado, why don't we jump into our first scenario? And Kaylee, over to you. Could you give us a bit of context on the first scenario? And yeah, we'll go from there.
Yeah, of course. So the first scenario that I'm going to talk through is a type of cyber attack or privacy attack called social engineering. So social engineering, as I say, it's a type of cyber claim that you might see. It's a type of cyber attack. It's usually, if you see it in the headlines, you'll say a good example of this recently, and I feel bad. I'm constantly poking at M&S because my vouchers wouldn't work when they had a cyber attack. But you know, the M&S cyber attack last year, it really did a huge amount of damage. It was actually it was social engineering. So when you hear cyber attack, like I think in our heads, a lot of us sort of start to think of like hackers and, you know, Matrix style screens and that terrible Die Hard film that was all about like the hackers with their roll up keyboards, and something really technical and really sophisticated. Social engineering, although it's categorized as a type of cyber attack, it's really a cultural failing, if you want my 2 cents on it. What happens is that you manage to convince someone to change something. So in the M&S instance, someone got through to one of their help desks, managed to convince one of their, I think, third-party IT help people to remove 2FA on an account and reset a password. And they got into the entire network that way, just, basically by doing a bit of sweet talking, and because the person at the other end really wasn't briefed. So I'm going to use that like example and the scenario around social engineering to kind of talk about a made up example that I think demonstrates a few things, inspired by, but not completely in line with the M&S incident. So like, if you can imagine a retailer at this time of year, they're starting to get really busy. I have accidentally coordinated myself to look like an elf, so we can call them elves.com. They are, someone pointed that out to me earlier and I'm mortified. They are absolutely drowning in a rush of Christmas orders. Like they're completely overwhelmed, as usually happens with retailers at this time of year. At the same time, they're also bringing on a new HR team member. So you've got a new HR team member. She started about a month ago, but she still hasn't completed her onboarding in their learning management system. They're massively short-staffed, they're under pressure, and the HR team lead has just granted them access to the systems just so she can get going. What happens then is that a caller posing as the HR platform's security team calls up, says, I'm part of the security team on the platform that you use. The payroll export for this month has failed. People aren't going to get paid if it doesn't get sorted. Can you do an urgent revalidation for me? None the wiser. She follows the instructions, clicks a fake login page. The login page is made to look exactly like the HR site. It's got the lookalike logo, all the things that you would expect to see. Enters her credentials in good faith, emails last week's employee report to reconcile. But what actually happens is that she's exposed staff contact details, national insurance numbers, partial bank data. But no one's any the wiser yet. No one questions the odd request about data until it's published online. In this point, like no one's kind of questioned the odd request. Maya doesn't know any different. She's not completed her training, and really, like anything like this is just seen as IT's job. It's not our problem. It's IT's job. But what you've ended up there is quite a serious breach. So there are, lots of red flags that you would look out for in that kind of scenario, and I'm happy to talk through them. But Mitch, I don't know if I'll pause for a moment just in case you've got any questions or.
No, I think thank you for sharing the scenario. Definitely it would be useful from your perspective, what are like a couple of the key red flags that you think all of the people on the call can be looking out for today?
Yeah. I mean, so there are a few key things that I would point out straight away. And like they should have been really obvious to you when I was talking through that, right? Like you've got a team member who has not completed their training and yet has been given access to an HR system with pretty sensitive information in it. I mean, payroll information is sensitive. Heavens knows what other information you might have access to as part of a payroll system. You could be looking at very sensitive data, including data on ethnicity, sexual orientation, things that are categorized as special category sensitive data under the GDPR. So that individual should not have been given access to systems unless they were properly trained. And that training really should include like how to spot something that is suspicious. So any call that says we need to validate this, like treat it by default as suspicious until you've run a check on it and have a process in place to be able to check. Whether it's you hang up and you phone them back on the number that you've got listed, like whatever your process is, but do have a process. There was really just a total lack of cultural awareness around data risk. Like the idea that data risk is seen as IT's problem and not everyone's problem is a massive red flag for us. You know, like data protection is and security are ultimately cultural problems with cultural solutions. And it's really important, like going back to that initial question, everyone's really busy, but you need to make sure that people understand that it is important. So all of those pieces together, I would say, are add up to one very large red flag.
Yeah. And just so for context, on today's webinar, we've got a very wide-ranging audience. We have everything from in-house DPOs through to general counsels, CFOs, we have heads of ops, we have founders. So from across the maturity spectrum in terms of data protection management. But I think probably one challenge could probably unite all of them, and that is that data protection typically gets lumped with one person, and it's quite common for an organization just to think that's your job to sort that out. What are some of the suggestions you have to the people on the call on like how to get away from that kind of stereotype and issue?
A couple of pieces that I'd recommend. So make sure that you've got good onboarding training. And when I say good onboarding training, I genuinely mean good. I mean like onboarding training that's not going to put people to sleep. And so people don't just kind of go, oh, data protection, switch off now, go and like reconcile my checkbook, which is a thing that people don't actually do anymore. But anyway, you know, like implement really strong, good, engaging training for your new starts. Make sure that it's refreshed regularly. Like really instill the point that data protection is everyone's responsibility, and tell them why. So like tell them what happens if it goes wrong, like, and that will probably be different for every organization. You know, like tell a story about what happens if this is not looked after properly, what happens to the organization, what happens to your customers' data, what happens to the individual at the end of it, what happens to the team members themselves, like where is the risk and why should it be important to them. So that training and those awareness pieces kind of add up together to really foster what I would call a kind of privacy aware culture. That's really important. That doesn't happen overnight. It takes work, and you need to kind of keep going on it. But overall, you end up with something really positive at the end of it. And then the other piece that I would say is like, you know, that links back to training and awareness, but like make sure your team members know what suspicious might look like and actually take a really conservative view on what might be suspicious and like, treat everything that you're not totally sure about as suspicious until you can be safe.
Nice. Yeah, I have a couple of follow-up questions, but first, Josh, I just wanted to hand over to you. From your perspective, is the scenario that Kaylee's just spoken through something that you've seen or something that you see a lot on the insurance side?
Yeah, so it's a pattern that's pretty common that we can see quite a lot, especially in busy periods. I think the misconception with social engineering is that, you know, these people are expert masterminds, and like we all do social engineering. If you've got kids, you have to social engineer them to get them to eat their dinner and convince them otherwise. It's really not like a, you know, there's degrees of skill to it. But in reality, we all kind of experience social engineering. We all do social engineering, and all it just takes is the unfortunate person to be on the receiving end of it. And you know, they're new. They don't want to be kind of seen as the person who's maybe incompetent. They don't know how to raise it. The business culture seems a bit fast paced. Everyone's busy. They don't know who to speak to, and then one thing leads to another, and it escalates. So yeah, we see it quite often in insurance. Often as well, it's usually due to the controls that just aren't in place. So you've got the stuff generally is like training. What we would be expecting in like insurance when we're kind of asking our clients what controls they have is making sure that everyone has least privilege. In essence, you don't have access to systems you aren't trained to use. There's multi-factor authentication, both to access those systems, but then also to take the data out of them as well. There should be maybe a validation, maybe two people to sign off the data being exported, especially in bulk, such as that. callbacks, procedures. A lot of it isn't tech. Like speak to a lot of businesses and they kind of talk about like their tech stack and they've got like EDR and XDR and they're doing this and it does all this fancy stuff for them. But in this scenario, there wouldn't be any sort of technology that you haven't already got that would kind of stop it. It's all kind of the kind of procedures and policies and processes to follow. But yeah, it can cause quite a significant headache for a lot of businesses in the busy period, which I think often gets overlooked. From an insurance perspective, you see it as like a commodity. It's like, okay, if something goes wrong, I've got this piece of paper and it says that I've got this much limit and it will protect me against everything. But going through your busy periods, you're trying to get sales in, the businesses leading up to kind of end of the year. And there's just a lot going on. People are being pulled away from their positions to deal with this. It's a whole a headache to go through it.
Nice. And so if insurer, obviously when you're going through your DD with an insurer looking at cyber insurance, so though you mentioned some of the controls that they would be looking at and evaluating, and obviously training is one of them. Are there any specifications around what type of training or what depth of training or topics covered, or like what level of detail would an insurer be looking at when evaluating the risk of a new business?
Yeah, so there's an expectation from insurers that businesses take their kind of cyber risk posture seriously, and we would assume that most businesses are doing that. When it comes to the insurance application process, if any lucky people on the call have to go through that process and go through those forms, you'll likely see a question asked in there. Do you provide cybersecurity training, including social engineering?
Yeah.
That's the extent of the question that gets asked, which from an insurer's perspective, that's all they need to, it's a bit more of a tick boxing exercise. I think when you've got a broker involved, they usually delve a bit deeper into what that looks like. Getting that is there different training types split between different job roles? But yeah, that's kind of how it looks.
So Kaylee, from your perspective as a DPO, what would you be looking at to ensure that the training in place for an organization is actually adequate and like reducing risk?
So a couple of pieces. Really making sure that it's like tailored to the organization. There's no point in you having your team members sit through like 2 hours on e-commerce if that's not what you do as a business. Like make sure that it's actually fit and relevant for your business profile. But as a DPO, really what I'm looking for is making sure that you're thinking about like data protection by design and default. And what that means in practice is like when you think about your systems, when you think about your processes, you ask yourself the question like, how does data protection factor into this? And so if you're bringing in a new system, say a new HR system, you have thought about access controls and they are implemented and your team are trained on what they are. You have thought about MFA and your team are trained on what that means, what they are expected to do in practice, and like what happens actually if they don't do it. So it's about being really kind of clear at every step of the way, both in terms of the way that you design your systems and then also the way you train your team on that system. So you'd have an overall data protection training that absolutely should cover things like the key pillars of data protection, but then your actual training on each of the things that you use should have an element of data protection brought into that helps cover it off.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'd also look at doing like the human-centric training where you kind of like you do a bit of a test run first and you ask them some questions and say like, how would you handle this scenario? You take that feedback away and you can kind of tailor your training accordingly. So I'd recommend doing something like that as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think a couple of points that I would add based on what I see across our customer base is it's important to differentiate between the two different types of training that can be delivered. One is e-training and the other is live training. So e-training, from what I see, generally is better. It's more scalable. It's better for generalized topics like phishing, social engineering, things like that, and keeping privacy top of mind. you can roll that out across your organization as people are onboarded and kind of drip feed e-training to them across the course of the year. Live training is probably better suited for specific teams or specific areas of your business that have like a very specific use case, where something a bit more custom is required. It can also, I feel like it can make things a bit more engaging. Like ideally with e-training, it should be short, straight to the point. When you do something live with someone in person, there's a conversation going on, and it feels like people become a bit more engaged as a result, assuming you can, yeah, make sure that you're not make it interesting when you're having that conversation with them. Are there any other thoughts to share on this one, Kaylee, before we move on?
No, I mean, just to really reinforce, like you can have a lot of things on paper that you do. Like you can say, we train our team. If you don't actually do it, if you're saying it's Christmas period, so we're rushing and we're not going to get this person trained on the system, we'll just train them as they go. What you've got on paper is useless. It's actually about the lived reality. So that's why I kind of say it's a cultural thing. The lived reality is different to the policies that you might have on paper gathering dust on a shelf.
Yeah, nice. That makes sense. Cool. So we're going to move on to our second scenario, which again isn't one of the increasingly common claim scenarios that we and Capsule come across. So Kaylee, back over to you to give a bit of context on what scenario number 2 is.
Yeah, absolutely. So scenario number 2, and I'm sure that no one is surprised to hear this one coming up, is phishing. If you have not heard of phishing by now, I would go and flag to whoever runs your internal training that they need to do a better job. Like you should have heard of phishing by now. But phishing is becoming increasingly sophisticated. It is so hard to spot in certain instances. I mean, some of it less so, but increasingly pretty sophisticated. So the scenario that I'm going to draw on is around phishing. So imagine you've got an e-commerce business, for example, like around 300 people, operate a fulfillment company. Couple of things that you should know about them. They don't currently run phishing simulations across the organization. So there's no clear protocol for what to happen if they think there has been phishing. And their internal culture is one of absolutely not admitting mistakes. The team manager is a shouter. And so is inclined to shout at people if they think that there's been an issue. Again, much like the previous scenario, like anything to do with data is considered to be IT's problem. They don't really want to talk to IT. That's not how the organization is structured. So in this scenario, something comes into the accounts assistant that just says urgent MFA update. What's happened is that the sender has basically copied the domain and they've used the Cyrillic alphabet. This is becoming increasingly common because it is incredibly hard to spot. So they've used the Cyrillic alphabet. Yeah, there's some examples up on the screen there for lookalike characters. And at a glance, it looks right. Okay, so they click on it and they land on a fake login page that looks more or less identical to what they're used to. Pages change a bit. So they think, okay, fine. They enter their credentials. And a background download silently installs. They don't know that at the time, but malware is being installed on their device. A few seconds later, like something feels not quite right. They're looking at the page and thinking I think this isn't quite right. They close it down and that's it. So that maybe the reason that they've worked out that it doesn't feel quite right is they've kind of like hovered over something and the URL looks a bit different to what they'd expect, or maybe it doesn't autofill their credentials in the way that they were expecting that would normally happen. After a few moments after they've put in those details, like they've got that niggling feeling, oh, I just think that maybe this is not quite right. Close it down. Don't want to get shouted at. I'm not going to tell anyone. So no phishing simulations, there's no clear reporting protocol, culture of not admitting mistakes, and they wouldn't know where to report it, even if they thought that they were going to report it. They close it down, they don't say anything. But hours later, attackers use the stolen login to access their payroll folders, their SharePoint, exfiltrate contact details, national insurance numbers, and it's actually only discovered when a security vendor flags some unusual outbound traffic. So again, you've ended up with quite a serious incident off the back of something potentially quite preventable.
Nice. It took me like 4 or 5 goes to actually see the difference between these emails. Like they're particularly the one on the right hand side. I was quite, I don't know if impressed is the right words, but yeah, it was pretty difficult to come across. There's a couple of things you mentioned there in terms of flags. The one I would love to just talk about a little bit more is actually making sure people report them. And so I think some context here. I think Kaylee, you and I come across a scenario recently where someone said their CFO clicked a phishing email, which resulted in a data breach because the CFO didn't report it to the internal owner of data protection, who at the time I think was the head of ops, which I think it was pretty crazy. And like, how do you make sure that people actually report these things? Because the number of audits that I've sat on where it tends to be this tends to be the case in slightly earlier stage businesses, but they say we have an incident log, but there's nothing on it because we haven't had any breaches or incidents. How do we stop that? Because there's got to be something that's happened.
Yeah, I mean, like, just to take a quick sidebar there, if there is an organization which has been up and running for a while, and is, you know, a reasonable size, and they're saying they've never had any instance and there's nothing on their breach log, that for me is an alarm bell to say, I think that your team just don't know what a data breach is and that they're not reporting. So, you know, like, how do you make sure that people report? Like, a couple of pieces. I mean, first of all, you make sure they know how to report it and where they should be reporting it to. The number of organizations that I have seen, and in fact have been inside of, where people just don't know who they're supposed to report to or how they're supposed to report, or it's not simple or it's not made obvious to them. Like, everyone is busy. And unlike me, most people don't spend all of their days thinking about data protection and how wonderful it is. A lot of other people have like real lives that they get on with and go and do in their real time. But when something happens, it needs to be easily accessible. So they need to be able to find out like how they're supposed to report. Specifically with phishing, my strong advice would be like have regular awareness campaigns around it, because it is very common. It happens a lot, like, or at least attempts happen a lot. So being able to spot them is important, and being able to flag them is important. Like, even if you don't click on anything, being able to flag phishing is important. Have a process for doing that internally. Make it super simple for people. But also, if you can, like, run simulations, run phishing simulations, roll them out so that people are used to it, and you can then report on that and say, in this simulated instance, 60% of our staff clicked on a link. We know we need to do something about that. Or, you know, these 15 people clicked on the link but didn't say anything. They thought they clicked on a real phishing link, didn't say anything. Like, what do we do now? So like, be able to bring those pieces in. It's tricky because people like inherently don't want to admit when they've made a mistake. So like, having a really shouty culture where you're concerned that any small mistake is going to get you into loads of trouble is probably not super helpful when it comes to people being honest about things that have happened. But it's much better that someone tells you about a data breach or a phishing like instance that they've clicked on than that they don't and you find out about it later. So yes, like, absolutely, whatever your culture is, there should, you know, you need to have a strong culture of people doing the right thing. But part of doing the right thing is telling you when something has happened.
Yeah, a good way to start with that, and ironically, if your CFO does click a phishing email, it actually can play to your advantage, because actually they should talk about it in public to the wider business and say, I received a phishing email, I've reported it, put it in your general Slack channel so everyone can see them doing it. And yeah, the best way to drive change in that sense is definitely leading from the top.
Absolutely. Like, if you can get your leadership bought in and talking about this stuff, you have won. Like, you're winning. Like, because if you're, you know, new HR person who's an administrator and is a bit nervous about everything, sees, oh, it's fine, like the CFO has made a mistake, they've reported it, there is a culture that this happens, then you're more likely to get that kind of engagement.
Yeah. Josh, any thoughts to add on the insurance side?
Yeah, I mean, malware is probably something that we see less often, but it's quite destructive. I think like stat I was looking at, like 18% of businesses who had a successful cyber breach, cyber attack were affected. 36% of like large businesses were affected. But yeah, I think from an insurance perspective, the notification as well. So obviously there's logging it internally, but I think there's also a misconception about just notify your insurer about an incident that you've had, whether it was successful or not. Obviously, if it was, you spotted something and you didn't fall for it, then, no need to tell your insurer. But if something starts going wrong, notify your insurer as soon as possible. They've literally got all the resources to prevent it from happening, to give you support and guidance. So it could just be advice. One of the kind of most useful things about cyber insurance in general is, okay, yeah, it provides you kind of indemnity limit and to get you back on your feet, but also the additional services they provide in the policy, like the advice. If you call up and say, hey, this thing's happened to me, not too sure, or the person in our department is off at the moment or in a meeting, I'm not too sure how to do this, you can call them up and they can generally give you advice on what to do and what's the best practice.
Nice, that makes sense, because I know there definitely can be a couple of pointy questions to answer in the event of a data breach. Not least, do we need to, or should we let the data subjects know? And there's also, do we need to report to the data regulators? Kaylee, on the data regulator side, what's the threshold to determine if you need to report it to the data regulator? Is there, any additional context you can share around that?
Yeah, so it depends on the severity of the breach, and the threshold is that there is a likelihood of harm to the data subject. So likelihood that there will be harm to the rights or freedoms of the data subject. So that's the bar for reporting to the regulator. The bar for reporting to data subjects themselves is actually a higher bar than reporting to the regulator. And so that is that there is a strong, I think the phrasing exactly is strong likelihood of harm to the data subject's rights or freedoms. So likelihood, strong likelihood. As I say, bar for reporting to data subjects slightly higher than reporting to the regulator. If you're in the UK, the ICO has some really good guidance that can kind of help talk you through when you should be reporting and when not, and how to kind of make that assessment. And actually, much like Josh was saying with the insurers, if you're really stuck, you can actually call the ICO and they will talk you through whether or not you need to make that report, or indeed you might have, someone externally that you can consult. We would be able to give advice on whether or not a report is required to the regulator. In some instances, organizations may choose to let data subjects know even if there is not a legal requirement to do so. And that might be because they have decided it's in the best interest of their brand to kind of be upfront about it and discuss it with data subjects because it's likely to be disclosed elsewhere. But the legal bar is higher than reporting to the regulator.
Got it. That makes sense. And then Kaylee and Josh will come to you after as well. From your perspective, when thinking about phishing, which is obviously one of the top privacy and security risks that every business faces right now, what are 2 or 3 of the top practical takeaways that you would share with everyone on the call today? What can they go and do today to help mitigate this risk?
Go and check what training you've got. And make sure that phishing is included as part of it. So what to do if you suspect that you've caught a fish, and how to report that, what to do. Consider rolling out phishing incident, phishing simulations.
And Josh, anything you would add?
Yeah, pretty much exactly the same. That's what we'd expect from an insurance perspective, but also just detecting how quick after an intrusion occurs, how quickly can you detect it and get mobilized to stop it? Do you have a plan in place that includes cyber attacks? Who's on that plan? When do you notify them? What about if your network goes down? And okay, how do you contact each other when you can't go on Slack and Teams and all that sort of stuff? How do you notify the insurers where your policy documents kept? Or there's so many different things that a plan would kind of pick up and cover. But yeah, plan. And if your default answer of who to call and you say speak to IT, probably just need to dig a bit deeper and see what exists behind that, because they might be thinking, okay, someone in IT might be thinking, I'll speak to the senior person in IT, and they're thinking, okay, well, I'll probably just speak to the CEO, and we end up in a circle.
Yeah. My favorite one was when we done an audit on one company and they shared this huge breach and incident policy, and one of the steps in the process was report it to the information security department, and the company doesn't have an information security department. So, this is definitely a template that you have not read. Yeah. So Yeah, definitely. Like right at the top, who should I contact? And make it a person with a mobile number, preferably, or an email. But yeah, you don't want to be like chasing them and figuring out how to contact them.
Just to add what Josh just mentioned there, I mean, there was some advice that came out, I think, just last week from the UK government around like making sure that you have paper copies of your plans in the event that things do go down. And if you as an organization have business continuity plans, like for my sins, I've been heavily involved in business continuity planning in the past. Like one of the things that often gets left out of them is the kind of planning for a cyber incident, because there's the assumption that that will be dealt with separately. Actually, if there's a major cyber incident, that is a business continuity incident. And so you need to make sure that those two things are talking to one another.
Nice. Thanks, Kaylee. Nice. Okay, conscious of time, so we are going to go on to our third scenario. So Kaylee, back over to you to give us a bit more context on this, this claim scenario.
Yeah, of course. So the last type of scenario that I'm going to talk through is what's known as an insider threat. This is like cards on the table. This is less common, but it's not uncommon. We don't see as many of these types. And the important thing to note about this type of incident is that everyone thinks that it could never happen to them. Everyone thinks that, you know, you're surrounded by this group of incredibly nice people who would never do any harm. An insider threat is effectively where someone with internal access deliberately exfiltrates or leaks information. So in this particular scenario that I'm going to lay out, you've got, let's say it's a charity, right? They're supporting survivors of domestic abuse. Unfortunately, you know, the UK charity sector being what it is at the moment and cuts to aid funding, they're having to make some redundancies. And so they're like reducing their size quite dramatically. And because of the nature of the redundancy process, it's been like a really long, drawn out, painful process. There's unfortunately, it's built a lot of ill will within the organization, and resultingly, they're making 15 people redundant. They have got cyber insurance. It was taken out a couple of years ago when the operations manager filled in the insurance questionnaire. She did so without consulting the head of IT. And what the questionnaire says is that there is a consistent process for offboarding and that there are more access controls than there actually are within the organization. The offboarding that they do is always ad hoc and a little bit chaotic. Their IT team are really stretched and their case management access pieces are run really thin. There's little to no access control. So a staff member who is maybe in the finance team, for example, has access to the case management system. And that's exactly what's happened in this instance. A member of the finance team is being made redundant. The access controls mean that they have access to everything. They're leaving feeling embittered and hurt. A couple of weeks later, that former employee gives it a shot and thinks, I'm going to try and log in. Logs in from home, downloads a bunch of safeguarding files which include things like health data, risk assessments, contact details, and then leaks them to a blogger to expose the management. Unfortunately, that breach isn't spotted until a survivor advocate reports seeing redacted screenshots online. So, you know, lots of red flags there, and it's the kind of thing that we all think, right, shouldn't be able to happen to us. You know, you all think like everyone here is saintly next to godly, no one would do something like that. But unfortunately, there are scenarios in which people do and will undo things that would surprise you.
And so how would you distill the top 2 or 3 red flags that people on the call today can go and look out for in this scenario?
Yeah, so a couple of really key things. I mean, the first is that like making sure that you've got a good offboarding process for people who are leaving the organization. Yeah. There should be no scenario in which days or weeks after an employee finishes, they can still access your systems. So that needs to be in place, it needs to be done, and it needs to be verified that it's done every time. So like whether or not that's like a little Google checklist or however you manage it, like you need to make sure that that process is in place. So like working with the IT team to get that in place. And the other thing is around access control. Like there should be no reason that someone who does not need access to case files has access to case files in that particular example. Similarly with like your HR systems, they shouldn't be accessible unless you absolutely need it. So you really need to be looking at the access that individuals have and making sure that it makes sense, so that you know, like, if there is a scenario where maybe someone who hasn't been made redundant, someone who's internal, just decides that they're fed up, they don't have access to absolutely everything to be able to do that. Like, they only have access to the things they need for their role, and therefore you minimize the scope of what could be impacted. So they're the top two that I would call out.
Nice. I have a couple of questions on how one would mature. How would one mature their access control measures over time? Because the bigger a company gets, the more complex it is, the more people there are. So what does it look like to start from the basics and then mature it as a company gets bigger?
I mean, my recommendation would be, like, start with your most sensitive data first. So whatever your most sensitive data is, whatever your most sensitive system, start there and start with a list of who absolutely needs access to it, and have a process whereby if someone else thinks that they need access, it needs to be verified by team lead, CTO, whoever it is that's appropriate to do that, and then build outwards from there. There are lots of different, like, you know, back-end products that can help with access. And, you know, if you're looking at things like Microsoft SharePoint and Google, like, you can do different things around, like, permission structures for files. So, like, most sensitive systems first, and then look at your, like, filing system. What's the most sensitive data that you hold? Lock that down, make it access restricted. If you can, like, make sure that that has to be reviewed on a regular basis. A top tip that I would always use when I was working with extremely sensitive data would be that we would have a 6-month review of all of the permissions on the really sensitive folders, and anyone who shouldn't be there anymore, because not just necessarily because they've left the organization, but maybe they've changed team, maybe their role has changed. Like, that's the point at which you would review that. But it, you know, it depends on the sensitivity of the data that you're collecting and processing.
Nice, that makes sense. And Josh, from your perspective, is there anything that would cause an insurer to reject a claim in this scenario?
Yeah, so I suppose misrepresentation, saying something that's not true. There's a lovely piece of a lovely act in the Insurance Act of 2015. If anybody wants to read it before they go to bed tonight, it's 21 pages. But yeah, effectively, when you go through, like, an insurance application, at the end of it, it'll say something like, you declare that all the information you provided is accurate and correct. And then you've taken reasonable steps to ensure the information is correct, which basically means, like, you know, checked in with the right people. There's a few things that the insurer can do if they feel like you've misrepresented the fact. Probably depends on what the intent was when you were doing it. So if the insurer can prove that is deliberate, reckless, then what they can do is they can avoid the policy, deny the claim, and also, to sweeten the deal, keep the premium as well. If they deem it's careless, like you've maybe just done something and it's, you know, you're just a bit naughty, then what they could do is they could do proportionate remediation. So they can just reduce the claim by what they would have charged. So if they were if they knew the circumstances and they were going to charge you an extra £500, they'd probably just take that out of the claim. If they decided that actually we would have applied this restriction, or we would have amended these terms of the policy, what they would do is see if the claim would be honoured with those restrictions in place. If it was, then, you know, continue as normal. Or if they realise that actually they would just decline the quote altogether, then what they would do is they would just avoid the claim and say we're not paying out. But this time they will actually give you your money back. But yeah, very serious consequences for not giving true information. I think probably doing nearly a decade in insurance now, sometimes you can spot when, or I can spot when maybe some businesses have maybe given some information. I'm like, do you want to just double check with some other people to make sure that this is correct? And it comes back and they're like, okay, yeah, actually, just slight tweak on this. This is actually the situation. But yeah, it's just important just to validate it, because consequences of doing it in a rush or assuming it means that you've effectively paid for something that might not actually respond when you actually need it the most.
Yeah, my favorite question that comes up in that regard, which is slightly different to access management, is when you ask a company how much data they process. And they say, give you one answer, and then you go back and you get another answer and another answer. It takes quite some time to get to the right answer. So yeah, definitely ensuring accuracy is important. Kaylee, from your perspective, what are the top couple of takeaways that you would leave the audience with on access management?
On access management particularly, the first is just make sure you've got some, make sure that you've actually thought about it, and that you are clear about what are the most important systems and data across your organization that really need to be protected. Start there, work your way out. And review it regularly. Like everything with data protection, it is not one and done. Like things change, people change jobs, the scopes of their roles change, they move departments, they leave the organization. Like make sure that all of those things are regularly updated and reviewed. Nice.
And I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to come on to a couple of quick questions that have come in. One of them is how do you manage customer requests to increase insurance values in contracts when they are likely to be based on fear of a breach in general? Josh, probably for you.
Repeat the question.
How do you
Now it feels like a game show.
How do you manage requests to increase insurance values in contracts when they're likely to be based on fear of a breach?
Increasing your limits based on what you have in contracts. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, or maybe I'm going to ask them to come back and clarify that question. So give me a sec. I'll type back to them. And then, yeah, the only other question is to come back to the one that was asked at the start. So, and that kind of taps into everything. It's how do you get people to realize that data privacy and security is super important when they're very busy and have very little time? Kaylee, probably best to come from you.
Yeah, I can take that one. Like a couple of pieces. I mean, like take a people first approach, right? Remember that it is ultimately that tech is really important, but you can have all the best tech in the world, but if your people don't know how to use it and don't know what they should be doing, it's kind of going to be for naught. And the same goes with policies. Data protection is ultimately a cultural problem, and it does have a cultural solution. So yes, tech's important. Things like MFA, absolutely critical. If you don't have it in place, please do. But like your people are also really important. So like look at your training, make sure that your training is engaging, relevant, and up to date, and that people are doing it. Like a lot of places I know have training, but they don't have any records of who's done the training, and they're not sure if everyone's up to date. So, like fix that. But also like keep talking about it, right? Like if you talk about data protection once a year in your annual training and then you never mention it again, everyone is really busy, and not everyone is freaky like me and enjoys reading about GDPR over breakfast. Like all of the people have their own really busy lives and jobs to do. So you need to keep reminding them of why it's important, like, why it's someone's granny that's going to be impacted if that data leaks, like how it's going to impact their team, their job. Like keep those conversations live, and then they stay front of mind for people rather than just becoming a once a year on paper exercise.
Nice. Thanks, Kaylee. And Josh, what would you add in terms of key takeaways?
Key takeaways is I'd plan, like think about what would happen, how would you mitigate it, speak to your insurer, speak to your broker to help you do that. We've seen situations that happen to others. We can give you like weird nuanced situations that you might not have considered yourself. Two things that that could tell you that most businesses aren't thinking of is social media policy, where it ties into the social engineering aspect, because or you're celebrating a key milestone and someone's in the background got their laptop open and they can see all your apps on the bottom and what software you're using. So when they send an emails for a login and reset your account, but they know what software you're using. They can kind of send the correct phishing email. They can tailor it a bit better. And then also vendor management as well, let's assume everybody listening has the best controls in place, the best policies, best procedures, top of the range. But what they do is they need to outsource a bit of work. They're doing a project and they've got a subcontractor coming in. He needs access to certain things. they don't have the same level of control you do. They don't have MFA. They are leaving their laptop open. They're doing a whole bunch of naughty stuff that would kind of send Kaylee into shock. Effectively, that's where breaches can happen. Is just the vendor that you're using. That's your kind of weak link. You could be as strong as you want, but yeah, if you're not protecting it through the vendor. So that's the two bits I would say. It's probably advice that people aren't really thinking of right now.
The vendor one's a good one. It's the smaller vendors that and less known ones that go under the radar that cause the issues, and we definitely see that a lot. And definitely when we're doing data mapping, a lot of the time companies are always quite surprised by actually how many different tools and vendors they're actually using when they have a proper look into it. So that's definitely one to look out for. Nice. Well, that's wraps us up. We've gone over a little bit. I hope you don't mind. But final thing, just to say thank you both for joining us today, and thanks everyone on the call. We'll be sharing a recording with everyone. And for anyone who is interested, as registrants, you'll get access to a free health check on both your privacy and insurance side. We'll be in touch on email, and you can reply to any of those emails if you would like to use that health check. And if you have any other questions, feel free to send them through directly to us, and we'll be happy to try and help.
Thank you.
Have a good day all.
Cheers, Josh. Thanks, Kaylee. See ya.
Bye.